Boots Ennis beats up and dominates Eimantas Stanionis. Boots Ennis is now the unified champion at welterweight. In this video, I'm going to break down how Boots was able to perform so unbelievably well in this fight, before discussing what he might look to do next in his career. Stick with me to the end of this one, as a lot of you will know how I predicted this to go, so you might be interested to hear what I have to say after the fight. Hello everyone, and welcome back to a guy called Henry. I hope you all caught this one, because this is the performance that we were waiting for from Jaron Boots Ennis. This is the Boots Ennis that I've been looking to watch myself and to see live. I thought he was absolutely fantastic in this performance. Now, before I get into this, I need to address people, because I've already had a few comments on my prediction video saying, I bet you feel stupid now and all this stuff. To be honest, guys, I've always said this. I make the best assessment I can of a fight, and then I make my prediction. And I predicted a Boots Ennis points win in this fight. But I thought it would be a very, very close fight. But I always predicted Boots to win because I felt he had the highest ceiling for a performance based on his talent level. And I said specifically in the video before the fight, firstly, I said how I thought he could win, which I'll talk about in a minute, because he did a lot of the things I said that he could do to try and win. But also I said that the last couple of performances, which haven't been great from Boots, have been because of things he hasn't been doing rather than what his opponents have been doing. I mean, obviously they're capitalizing on mistakes he's making, but Boots has all the tools to fight the perfect fight to beat anybody, because I believe he's that good and that talented. So in answer to the people that are coming out and saying, oh, Henry, do you feel embarrassed? You know, you got it wrong. No, I don't, because that's what Make Your Predictions all about. It's about assessing the information available to you and trying to predict the outcome. Based on Boots' last two performances, he didn't fight that well. And so it was completely reasonable to suggest that he might have a hard time against Stanionis, who is a very aggressive, come-forward fighter who loves being in the pocket. Before I get into breaking down how Boots was able to win this and talking about some of the tactical and technical details, do subscribe to a guy called Henry. If you're new, bang a like on this video if you're enjoying the content, and get your comments in the comments section below. What did you make of Boots Ennis' performance? I also want to know who you think he should fight next, but we're going to have quite a detailed conversation about that at the end. And also, where do you think Boots is now in the top 10 pound for pound list? Is he in the top 10 pound for pound list? We'll get into that in this video also. Now, Stanionis only managed to make it through 6 rounds against Boots. The fight was stopped at the end of the 6th round by Stanionis' corner. And I can pull up my scorecard now for you, to show you how I scored the fight as things were going. So I had it 59-54 for Ennis at the end of the 6th round. And I felt that he was fairly dominant in this fight. However, what I will say is that Stanionis did, give him some things to think about. And he had his own moments in the fight. He landed some good punches himself, but he was extremely aggressive, Stanionis. Now, the reason I gave Stanionis a good chance before this fight is because in the last couple of fights Boots has had, he's been getting hit quite a bit and holding his feet a bit too much in the pocket. His defense hasn't been that sharp. It hasn't looked that good. But in this fight, he was much improved. And I always said that if he was able to adapt and change and fight a bit differently in this one, he could make it fairly easy work for himself, because he is by far the talented fighter, the best guy at 147 pounds. There's a couple of factors behind this. We'll get into the first thing, which is just executing a game plan. The game plan here was lots of lateral movement, lots of jabs, making it extremely hard for Stanionis to cut the ring off and land punches himself. Constantly throwing that lead hand, whether it was in southpaw or whether it was in orthodox, and lots of lateral movement, constantly moving around Stanionis, who can be guilty of moving a little bit too much in straight lines when he comes forward and tries to cut the ring off and close the man down. The biggest problem for Stanionis, and I said this before the fight, the key areas that I identified in Stanionis as being weaknesses that I thought Boots might be able to capitalize on. If you go back and watch my prediction video, I said that there's 2 main issues with Stanionis. One is that his head movement isn't great, meaning he's on the line a bit too much. One of the reasons Chukajan caused Boots Ennis so many issues was because constantly getting off the line when he threw his punches, and therefore he was not there to be countered. Stanionis, on the other hand, he's very, very square, and I said this before, he's very square, he's constantly on the line, so he's quite hittable. And he carries that high guard as well, which for someone like Ennis, you can manipulate the guard, and we saw this in the fight. Ennis was constantly measuring and jabbing high to occupy the guard and firing lovely shots to the body. Straight shots, uppercuts. He was hooking around the guard and landing big hooks to the head as well. And I also said that the other problem with Stanionis is that he tends to lean forward quite a lot with that high guard. A fighter is in the pocket, he's square, he's on the line, he's not moving off that line. For Boots Ennis, the uppercut is on, and I literally said before the fight, I think that will be a key shot for Boots if he gets his execution right, because Stanionis leans forward, he exposes that position. And then if you watch how the fight was finished, it was like 4 or 5 consecutive uppercuts straight through the guard from Boots Ennis that dropped Stanionis. And it wasn't even like Boots was really making him miss and making him pay. It was more like Boots was just bludgeoning him. He was so much more powerful, so much stronger, that he was able to literally just punch a hole through Stanionis' guard in the end and completely dominate him, just hurt him so much more. There was a couple of rounds where Stanionis actually probably landed the slightly cleaner work, especially to the head. But because Boots was just so much more powerful, Stanionis was the one that was coming away with a bloodied nose, looking like he'd been in an absolute war. And again, another big difference between the two men was the physical strength, not in the clinch necessarily, but in holding their shot. You know, Boots Ennis' chin seems to be absolutely elite. Did eat a couple of big punches in there, but it didn't matter. He just took them on the chin quite literally and continued to box. But one thing we need to talk about, the key to this ability to have lots of lateral movement from Boots, especially early in this fight while Stanionis was coming on fast, before Boots was able to start slowing him a bit with the bodywork, was the fact that his gas tank looked pretty good at the start of this fight. He really had his legs. Boots' first line of defense has always been his legs and his footwork. Without that, he doesn't have as much of a defense because he's not always super disciplined with his guard. As we saw, there was a few times he ate clean counters from Stanionis. But he looked fitter in this one, and there was two key factors for this. Number one was the fact that he didn't have to make that rehydration clause for the IBF. And the second one that really shocked me, in the build-up to the fight, and we were all talking about how drained and terrible Boots Ennis looked a few days out from the fight, but he said that this is the first time, I saw this in an interview, this is the first time in his career that he's worked with a nutritionist for a fight. I just cannot believe that. Someone as big as him, who's been making welterweight, is at the top level of the sport, world champion, has never worked with a nutritionist before. I was absolutely startled to hear that. But I think we saw the difference here. I think those two things combined, the lack of check weight from the IBF on the day of the fight, and the fact that he worked with a nutritionist to make welterweight the absolute best way he possibly could. He looked like he had more stamina in there than he's had in recent fights. He looks a lot more energized. He was moving loads at the beginning. And whilst I do feel that started to slow a little bit, you know, that's natural. It didn't necessarily matter because by that point, Stanionis had also slowed from the body shots and Boots Ennis was starting to absolutely rip the shots in, which you need to hold your feet to do anyway. One thing I do want to mention though, and this is just an innocuous moment because at the end of the day, it had absolutely no bearing on the outcome of the fight, but I think it was at the end of round 3 or around the end of round 3, there was a knockdown that was called a slip. And I, for the life of me, do not understand why. Stanionis landed a clean punch to the side of Boots' head. I watched the fight, I've not watched it back. I would need to check this again. But guys, do let me know in the comments, what do you thought of this moment? Because to my mind, Stanionis landed a punch to the side of Boots' head, and I thought that should have been scored a knockdown in round 3. I was quite surprised that it wasn't. So that's a talking point that I'd love your thoughts on. As I say, I haven't watched it back, but in the moment, I was so sure that it was actually a knockdown, and I was quite surprised it wasn't scored as one. Again, it didn't matter in the end because Boots got up and he was absolutely fine. Immediately, he was fine and very unshooken by the punch. Didn't have his legs taken from him at all. And he was ready to just stand up and got straight back into his rhythm. So perhaps it was a slip that I didn't see properly. But to me at the time, it looked like a clean knockdown. I was quite shocked it wasn't scored as such. But as I say, not that important to talk about because it didn't have any bearing on the outcome of the fight in the end. Now, the next two things we really need to talk about are what does Boots do next? And do I think he's a top 10 pound for pound fighter in the world right now? So for me, Boots' next move is completely dependent on that IBF rehydration clause because now it's going to be all about avoiding that, in my opinion. I don't think he should ever deal with that again. I don't think it makes sense for him. I think he's far too big to have to make that check weight. So he's got a number of options. So I think the first thing he can do is try and unify against Norman or against Barrios. In a unification, as we saw in this fight, even when you've got an IBF belt, you don't have to make the check weight. They veto it when there's other belts in the equation with other fighters. However, once you hold more than one belt, if you include the IBF and you're not fighting in a unification, you do then have to make the IBF check weight. So the only way for him to avoid that, if he holds the IBF belt, is to do a unification. So that would be the preferable move, I'd say. If he can't get a unification fight next, I would suggest that he will vacate the IBF belt so that he no longer has to make that check weight. So those are the two options there. And if he doesn't do that unification, I'm not sure who he'll be fighting because, as I say, there's not many big names at welterweight. I do think that an interesting option for him, and because it's an all-American clash, I think Keith Thurman could be a very interesting move if he can't get a unification fight. Keith Thurman up at 154 right now. He's about to fight Tim Tszyu. Maybe he doesn't want to try and make welterweight. I don't know, but I think that Keith Thurman fight could be really interesting. And they want to grow his profile in the US, so that kind of makes sense to me. So those are the options so far. The other option is going up to 154. And we've all been talking about that for a while. I do think we'll see an even more enhanced Boots in an athletic sense because it's even less weight to cut. You can probably perform even higher. He's definitely big enough to be a 154 pounder. And I think that Virgil Ortiz fight, I'm not sure it's worth making just yet because I think it could be absolutely huge. I think it could be a really, really big fight if they wait a bit longer. But at the same time, I want to see it I don't want to miss it. So personally, I think they make it as soon as they can. But I think the Boots will try and unify first, but then that 154-pound move, especially against Virgil Ortiz, and you know, the Saudis would be desperate to have more of a profile in America, and I think that Boots Ennis could actually be the future. I think he holds the keys for them to the American market. I think growing Boots' profile in America is absolutely key for them in their next moves as an outfit to try and, grow their presence in America. So those are the options for Boots as I see it. The biggest thing will be making sure that rehydration clause isn't required anymore in his career. I think if I'm the other fighters, you probably, if you're the managers of the other fighters, you probably try to not take a unification unless really good money is put on the table. Because if Boots has to vacate that IBF belt, then it becomes available. And then potentially you get the chance to go and try and catch another belt yourself. You have more money, more bargaining power when you go to the table. So it really just depends how much money people are willing to put on the table to fight Boots. But I think you can be a little bit political and a little bit strategic with that IBF belt now. And I think if you're Boots, you're probably happy enough to let it go if you can't unify, or as I say, go to 154. The next thing that we need to talk about before we go here is, can we now say that Boots Ennis is a top 10 pound for pound fighter in the world? Let me pull up a pound for pound list and we can work our way through it and see what we think. So we've got it up here on the screen. So we'll work our way through it and we'll kind of call out the guys that are definitely not going to be dislodged by Boots Ennis. And then we'll see where, there may be an opportunity for him to be considered a top 10 pound for pound fighter. So Usyk, Crawford, Inoue. I think we can all pretty much unanimously agree that these guys are not getting moved. And this is the ESPN list, by the way, guys. We've then got Beterbiev, Canelo, and Bivol. And I think, again, I don't think any of them can be moved from that list. I think they've all achieved a lot more than Boots Ennis has at this point in his career. But then 7, 8, 9, 10 is where it gets interesting. So Jesse Bam Rodriguez. I think for me right now, Boots hasn't shown as much as Bam has. Bam's been a multi-weight world champion, which I think, although it's easier in the lower weights, I think because Boots hasn't been a multi-weight champion yet, and because Bam is so good and has beaten some legends of the sport, I think that Bam right now is slightly ahead of him, but it is you can have that debate. You certainly can. Gervonta Davis, Shakur Stevenson are really interesting ones for me because I think both of them lack a depth of resume. Gervonta Davis has that win against Ryan Garcia, which as a name and as a talent, I think is a big win. But then we take into consideration the fact that Garcia was very weight drained for that fight. And at the same time, Boots is a unified champion, but again, he lacks that real marquee win, that real marquee name on his record. So I think Gervonta, Shakur, and Boots are all comparable in terms of where they're at right now. And then finally, Junto Nakatani. I think there's an argument for Boots to get in there somewhere in 8, 9, 10. I'm not sure I'd have him again ahead of Gervonta, although Gervonta arguably lost his last fight. Boots has also had some near misses in his last couple of fights. So, it's not like he's been absolutely incredible and dominant, but this is a return to form without question. He's shown us everything he needed to show us in this fight. I think there's an argument for one of those three potentially dropping out for Boots, somewhere in 8, 9, 10. I think you can make an argument for Boots Ennis. But guys, get in the comments below and let me know, do you think that Boots is in that top 10 pound for pound list now? So guys, I'll probably do a little game film analysis of the fight once it is out online for me to react to. I want to show you guys some of the things I've just been talking about here. But overall, when you're thinking about how Boots could go about winning this fight, I thought he fought pretty much picture perfect. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant display. Congratulations to Boots. He has shown the world that he is still a prodigious talent. And he's starting to fulfill that potential. I was so impressed with how he boxed to the game plan tonight, the way he stuck to the strategy. If I'm going to be really, really harsh, the thing I still really need to see from Boots is adaptation on the fly. And I think before the fight, something people were talking about was him lacking a bit of ring IQ. I think that he can go in there and execute a game plan. He's shown us that tonight. He looked absolutely brilliant, but he went in there and he did what he was planning on doing. What happens with Boots when it's not going his way? The last fight in particular, it wasn't going his way, and he did seem to struggle to adapt to what Chookagian was doing. And I think we need to see him in there with a better opponent who can actually make him think and can change things on the fly to see if Boots can do the same thing. And that's maybe the one small question mark that remains for me over him is just, can he adapt on the fly in the ring? But without question, I think he's come through a difficult time. I think they figured out the weight thing now. The nutritionist seems to have helped him. I think not being beholden to that IBF rehydration clause moving forward is going to be absolutely massive for him. And overall, I'm just so happy we've got an on-form Boots Ennis now. We can actually just get excited about the dude now and look to see what he's going to achieve in his coming fights. I think we've got a genuine superstar on our hands if he can continue moving the way he is. And a brilliant, brilliant performance. Those uppercuts were just so fun to watch. To the body, to the head, absolutely stunning. And he just showed what a powerful, powerful welterweight he is in there tonight. Last little word on Stanionis. Very, very game. I think his corner pulled him out because they probably knew how game he was and they probably saw him getting knocked out quite badly if he continued to pile on the way that he does. That is how he knows how to fight. That is what he does. And that is a fair criticism of Stanionis. He has one way of going about things, really. What does he do next? Well, I'd love to think he'll get another shot, but I don't know if he will. I don't know who he'll fight next. But his name hopefully will have been enhanced a little bit by having this fight. Fighters might be a bit less intimidated by him now as well, so maybe he'll get another chance. But I still like Stanionis. I still think he's a very solid 147-pounder, very good fighter. I think he'll always be in good, fun fights. But Ennis, just an absolute class above tonight. Anyway, guys, hope you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe, bang a like on it, get your comments in below on all the things we've been talking about. And as I always say, on to the next one.